move directly into our first opening session and our first opening plenary speaker. And after all of the, I suppose, the important thank yous and all the important introductions, it really gives me a great pleasure to actually introduce this first talk and to introduce Graham Rowles, who will be speaking to you about aging, place, and the life course of societies. So Graham is Professor Emeritus at the University of Kentucky, where he was founding director of the Graduate Center for Gerontology. His research focuses very much on the lived experience of place, that idea of being in place, which is really important. And he's renowned not only for his extensive track record of applied research, but also his theoretical contributions around that idea of being in place over space and over time. I suppose because of these various different contributions, Graham has held roles as president of the Southern Gerontological Society and the Association for Gerontology in Higher Education. He's also a fellow of the Gerontological Society of America. But in addition to this, he is also what is known as, and I have to get this right, a guardian gardener within the Association for the Preservation of Iris Flowers. So while this seems slightly off tone from a research biography, it is exactly how I think about Graham, not so much as a gardener, but as a guardian of aging in place scholarship, or at least one of the prime ones, and certainly as a significant mentor for a whole host of scholars, including perhaps myself as well. So it's very fitting that we are asking Graham to give this first opening plenary at this conference, in a conference that's really attempting to unpack notions of change, unpack notions of the power of context, and that's why Graham's talk comes at a really appropriate time. So Graham has been here before, maybe about 10 years ago, and at that point he did assign himself a nightly allowance of a small pizza and 2 pints of Guinness, so he well habituated himself into being in place in Galway, so he does practice what he preaches. So I will ask Graham to come over here. Graham will talk for about 40 to 45 minutes. After that point, I will introduce Professor Andrew Sharlock, who will act as respondent, and then we'll open the floor for some questions and answers. So thank you very much, and please welcome Graham.
I need to start with, can everybody hear me up the back there? Okay. I need to start with two comments. One is that your president and the people who've spoken so far all lie. I was here about 10 years ago, and I was here during a heat wave, and I was here for about 6 to 8 weeks, and it never rained. And so when I've come back this time, it's never rained. So I'm sure it's sunny all the time, and you're just having this myth of the rain to keep people away. The second thing I wanted to mention is that this presentation and the manuscript on which it's based was drafted by Malcolm Cutchin and myself. I contributed anything that you like about the paper. Malcolm contributed the materials with which you are less enamored. And I'm being a partner in a talk that he's giving in a year or so, and he's promised to do the same thing to me. Grappling with my ever more sophisticated remote for my television is so damn frustrating. Two of my closest gardening friends relocated from Texas to Kentucky because their plants were all shriveling up. Interesting retirement decision. I live in Kentucky, and I feel voiceless, and I feel powerless because my state is bright red, so red it glares. These three personal observations, C. Wright Mills would have argued, represent personal troubles that lead and are manifest in larger societal concerns. Rapid advances in technology, climate change, and the impact of the political economy of the place where I live. In this presentation, we will be focusing on these themes. Okay, can we go forward? Okay. For several years, taking slightly different paths, and with multiple different colleagues, we've been exploring the importance of place in old age and its relationship to well-being, a journey culminating most recently in the Handbook of Aging in Place. In this presentation, consistent with the diversity and social change theme of the conference, we extend our thinking by considering currently evolving manifestations of aging and place. Our primary focus is a critical exploration of the way the present situation is a prelude to an era in which many aspects of aging and place will become particularly problematic, and especially so in the context of increasing diversity in the lived experience of growing old, between those who have access to resources and those who do not. The essence of our argument is that major global and societal trends risk a dystopian future that will increasingly challenge the ability of older adults to spend their later years embraced by caring people in supported and fulfilling places. On the other hand, we remain hopeful and optimistic that this grim scenario can be ameliorated through developing habits of social inquiry accompanied by imagination and actions that facilitate increased inclusion, participation, empowerment, influence, and perhaps even control by older people in remaking the places of their lives in response to the forces that are increasingly threaten these places as environments in which to age. In developing our thesis, we employ a dynamic transactional perspective on aging and place. Instead of viewing aging and place as separate entities in a constant feedback loop, we reframe these elements more holistically and relationally. Aging and place evolve simultaneously as part of a situation. That is the primary unit of analysis we'll be dealing with. Focusing on the totality of an evolving situation allows us to move toward understanding how diverse influences shape the lived experience of individuals, communities, and societies in particular locations. Our view is that each aging in place situation is the outcome of a processes of place integration. This perspective is based on the premise that, over time, people develop a complex co-constitutive relationship with place. Of course, people contribute to making places, but they are also deeply shaped by these places, with the formation of many personal and social habits of action and thought being a most important force. Habits allow smooth and efficient relationships to emerge and for harmony to be sustained in a place situation. This perspective is informed by the school of thought known as American pragmatism, especially its greatest philosopher, John Dewey. Central to this way of thinking is recognition of the world as dynamic and as uncertain. In other words, the ongoing role of change and our ability to understand it and respond is key. Thus, as life happens, people or place, and thus some dimension of their relationship, changes to the extent that a sense of need to act in response to such change is present. It is important to consider what leads people to engage in processes of place integration, to seek a sense of insideness and of belonging, and to develop strong attachment to places. What is the underlying motivation? Being in place is the feeling of equilibrium, of comfort and belonging, a kind of transcendent rightness that we seek to achieve as we endeavor to fit and to become as comfortable as we can in a place in a way that becomes taken for granted, often subconscious, and makes us feel whole. This is perhaps best expressed in phrases such as, "This is exactly where I want to be. This is how I want to feel. I feel I'm in the right place." The quest for being in place is a fundamental human imperative. It's no less important than the need for shelter, food, and sex. It represents one end of an experiential continuum, the opposite extreme to being out of place. Being in place is a dynamic phenomenon, something we invariably attempt to develop as we enter each new place, whether it be attending a cocktail party, establishing ourselves in a motel, or adjusting to a new place of residence. Achieving being in place involves consonance between the unique way in which we personally identify with places and the identity of those places themselves. This is established through the interwoven modalities of action, our physical use and movement in space, our orientation, the way we are cognitively aware of the places we inhabit, our feelings or emotional affiliation with place, and vicarious experience, our history of involvement in each place or comparable environments. Over time, this habitual expression of these modalities leads to a sense of physical and social and autobiographical insideness as a component of our being in place. Change in the person-place situation, especially negative change that arises into awareness, signifies situational disharmony. The sense of disharmony in the person-place relationship triggers place integration processes, such as recognition of the situation and its current associated issues, inquiry about the situation and possible courses of action and possible outcomes, the use of our habits and imagination to expand and interrogate those possibilities, and then acting to re-coordinate the place situation in ways that restore harmony within the situation. This understanding of inquiry is one in which the social shared approach to what one might call problem solving is highlighted, because it enhances the understanding as well as the habits and imaginative potentials of the processes. In this way, we view older people as engaging with their environmental situation to maintain patterns of behavior and lifestyles that are, to the degree allowed by individual circumstances, consonant with their needs, their way of life, their values, and their priorities. Each individual, each community, and each society can be viewed through the lens of the life course, a dynamic, constantly evolving balance of structure and agency. Change, both endogenous and exogenously provoked, is a given in the evolution of the life course of communities and of societies. Some changes, such as pandemics, natural disasters, regional conflicts, and political upheavals, are difficult to anticipate and have unpredictable outcomes. Others can be better foreseen and thoughtfully considered as possible future scenarios and planned for in advance. Here, we consider three megatrends that seem more or less inevitable. First, accelerating technological advance in an increasingly digital world will continue to be transformative. Second, such transformations will occur in the global context of climate change. This has transitioned from being an inconvenient truth to a major concern shaping the thoughts and lives of many, especially younger generations who will experience the brunt of the effects of a warming planet and need to figure out the best ways to deal with them. Finally, the future of aging and place will be profoundly influenced by evolving neoliberal and populist political economies and associated values within Western societies. Each of the three megatrends will be considered in turn. But before proceeding, it is important to acknowledge that in any place, the effects of change are not uniform. we argue that the potential for the type of place integration that facilitates being in place during forthcoming decades will become increasingly problematic, especially for those older adults who do not have access to power and resources, accentuating processes of economic divergence, social exclusion, and cultural estrangement. Over the past half-century, the lives of older adults have been transformed both directly and indirectly by ever-increasing, accelerating advances in technology. The increasing sophistication of technological innovation has been manifested in a proliferation of smart home technologies, voice-controlled intelligent personal assistants, robots, and integrated technology support systems. Such resources are complemented by both wearable and in situ monitoring and surveillance technologies, including video and GPS, that enable both formal caregivers and family members to observe and interact with clients and relatives from a distance. Indeed, technological progress raises the prospect of being able eventually to provide a completely ambient environment that enables even the most frail and vulnerable older adults to maintain residence in a familiar place, in a familiar dwelling. Advances in communications technologies, including the cell phone, internet, and social media platforms, have enabled older adults to digitally continue engaging in the world even when their mobility is compromised. Moving forward, let me back that up. Okay. Let me move backwards. Oops, I'm trying to go backwards here. All right. Okay, that's all right. Previous. I got it, I think. Oops. Previous. Previous. What? Yeah, let me just get back on this. There we go. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Moving forward, it is important to acknowledge problematic aspects of technology advance. What Golant terms perceived collateral damages. First are questions about the physical ability of current and future generations of older adults to actually use devices that often emphasize dexterity and speed of response. More important is the question of adoption and acceptability of new technologies. Older adults with values shaped during an adolescence in the pre-digital world of the typewriter and landline telephone may be reluctant to embrace life clutching an iPhone. Many older adults embrace technologies that prolong their ability to remain at home, as well as enjoy the interactional benefits of FaceTime and communication from a distance. But others rue the reduction in face-to-face communication, accentuated during the COVID-19 pandemic, and they miss the warmth of an intimate hug. Indeed, while many older adults support the use of technologies to provide assistance with practical tasks, they would rather not have them become a substitute for direct social interaction, and fear that surveillance technologies will become an excuse for fewer visits from family members. There are also privacy concerns and discomforting aspects of surveillance. In a world of ever-accelerating generational divergence, this goes beyond merely an aversion to change. It involves reluctance to embrace an entirely new, non-place-based set of lifestyles and cultures of physical separation. There are also issues on a more fundamental level. First, paradoxically, it's not clear that new and emergent technologies, even though they may facilitate contact and reduce social isolation, can actually be effective in reducing rather than accentuating the global pandemic of loneliness. The expense of technological advance also raises concern about older adults' access to and ability to pay for expensive technologies. We fear a widening chasm between the haves and the have-nots, divergence among populations and places where technologies such as internet are physically and financially available, and those where they are not. This divergent access is illustrated by the digital divide between urban and rural areas that is only now being addressed. Perhaps most anxiety-provoking are concerns raised by the seemingly inexorable incursion of artificial intelligence. There are considerable potential benefits to be accrued from this development, in that it can process vast amounts of information in generating optimal solutions to situations. Advantages of AI in medical research, in healthcare and caregiving are already apparent, but there are also problematic aspects. Concerns about accuracy, about control, and most important, about meaning. Recent focus on the theory of bullshit suggests that AI can generate erroneous outcomes, AI hallucinations, and lead to false and misleading conclusions. AI's indifference to the truth and human well-being should also provide us with pause. With respect to control, beyond scary HAL and 2001 Space Odyssey scenarios are more prescient concerns about the desirability of AI's potential for seeded decision-making. Here the concern is with issues of human control and the potential of older adults to make decisions that are reflective of their own personal history, their own lifestyles, and their own values. To what extent is it possible to even conceive of incorporating the unique life course experiences, patterns of place integration, and sense of being in place of older adults within an AI application? While AI technologies may exercise care in the sense of efficient and efficacious caregiving, it is an open question if they will ever have the capacity for conscience, experiencing meaning, and expressing the human emotion of caring. The implications of technological advance for aging in place are diverse. Most obvious are the disruptive aspects of new technologies as older adults are forced to adapt to and eventually adopt these new technologies. For example, possessing a cell phone and adopting the modified lifestyle this implies has become almost obligatory. This change in situation causes disharmony, movement towards a sense of being out of place, and a need for adjustment in processes of place integration. One related outcome has been an increased focus on the home as the locus of all activity and as a site for what we now call post-human care. Another has been the development of online third places. In addition to modifying the aging in place situation of older adults, trends in technology advance accentuate economic, social, and spatial inequalities. Older adults are particularly vulnerable to climate change because it poses immediate threats to their health and their well-being. To provide one example of health implications among many possibilities, increasing temperatures pose threats to cardiovascular health. Increases in mortality and morbidity among older adults have been well documented in areas experiencing climate change. In addition, a significant proportion of the older population lives in places that are currently or will soon become particularly sensitive to the effects of climate change, including desert retirement communities and coastal recreational areas. There is also evidence of higher concentrations of low-income older adults in at-risk locations. The outcome of this combination of circumstances is that vulnerable people and a vulnerable population finds itself living in places that accentuate that very vulnerability. A key result is the need to adapt to an increasingly inhospitable climate. There has been some consideration of alternative individual behaviors, of harnessing social support networks in new ways. housing and design modifications, and community adaptive strategies that allow older adults to age in place. A community-level case study of Bridgeport, Connecticut, for example, identified community-level response opportunities, including identifying and monitoring vulnerable individuals, providing information and education, physical design and modification such as planting trees and providing green roofs, and contingency planning for disaster weather conditions. Indeed, climate-related accommodations should be an explicit component of all age-friendly community initiatives. A second option, of course, is migration or relocation. One large-scale manifestation of this is a change in retirement relocation destinations, with moves away from places with increasing temperatures, increased exposure to wildfires and air pollution, more frequent flooding, and the likelihood of hurricanes and catastrophic weather events. We envisage a reversal, or at least a reduction, of historical patterns of Sunbelt and coastal migration and retirement migration. As with technological advance, climate change creates aging and place disharmony for individual older adults by disrupting established and habitual processes of place integration. Stress, in a sense of being out of place, results from the uncertainties and risks, including risks to health, property damage, and the disruption of social networks and familiar lifestyles. Forced adjustment in processes of place integration may include spending more time in the comfort of an air-conditioned home, seasonal avoidance of holiday travel to areas of perceived elevated risk, and lifestyle accommodations. As noted with the anecdote at the beginning of this presentation, older adults are increasingly incorporating consideration of climate change into their retirement relocation decisions. But these options are not available to all persons. Persons of lower socioeconomic status may not have access to or be able to afford operating air conditioners for prolonged periods. They may not be able to afford the relocation or migration option. Indeed, many options are available only to those with resources and those who are not socially vulnerable. One outcome of this increasing differentiation of places, as some ecological systems become increasingly unstable and hostile settings for aging, while others retain or even improve their status as supportive places to grow old. Across the globe, we envisage an evolving landscape as some communities unaffected by or even enhanced by climate change can actively promote themselves as conducive to older adult lifestyles, while others are forced to resort to strategies that emphasize the ways in which they are able to ameliorate or successfully cope with the effects of climate change. Beyond the major issues of climate change are the significant problems generated by global capitalism and the systems of governance that support it. Among the chief concerns of any capitalist-dominated political economy are the various forms of inequality it produces and the negative outcomes generated by those inequalities. In democratic capitalist states, such as the United States and the United Kingdom, policies were developed in the 20th century to help protect older adults and enhance quality of life, such as old age pensions and healthcare insurance, the so-called welfare state. The more recent evolution of those and similar political economies have shifted toward neoliberalism and have chipped away at public institutions central to the welfare state programs. Neoliberal policies have emphasized free market approaches which lower taxes that fund programs and eventually lead to implementation of austerity policies to balance budgets, as well as the privatization schemes that give corporations increasing control of programs. Such austerity and privatization policies are important causes of growing inequalities across societies and within old age populations. The recent literature on precarity makes a strong case that these shifts in political economy push more and more older people into precarious situations that involve increased risks to their health and to their well-being. Austerity not only marginalizes individuals or households, it also undercuts age-friendly communities and the age-friendly cities movement, and its effects on places are distributed unequally, harming, for instance, poorer neighborhoods more than wealthier ones. In these ways, neoliberal political economies disrupt the person-place situation and create threats to being in place. The re-emergence and successes of far-right political parties and ideologies also potentially threatens older adults. But it's less clear how, because there is less evidence and support to draw upon. The most common characterization of this movement as radical right-wing populism is symbolized by examples of Donald Trump in the United States and the Brexit movement in the United Kingdom. Drawing together the intent to shape politics around populism, the concept of representing grievances of the vast majority of the population against the minority of social elites, and nativism, prioritizing the interests of the native-born population over others, radical right-wing populism is an ever-increasing popular counter-movement to neoliberalism, both in North America and in Europe. The forms of political economy that dominate the Western world in the 21st century, especially neoliberalism, have threatened the experience of aging in place through increasing precarity, disrupting systems of care and caring, and changing places through investing in capitalist-focused development, such as gentrification. Similar to the massive forces of technological advances and climate change, political economies of the 21st century are threatening to many older people and their being in place. Housing, systems of care and caring, and rights and abilities to participate in social life for older adults are at stake. It is easy to imagine a dystopian future for older adults and to be overcome with hopelessness in the face of these megatrends. Of course, there is peril, but there is also promise. We continue our argument by asserting the importance of a pragmatist focus on social hope and meliorism. So what can we do? Specific situations on every level are influenced by the processes of constant multi-directional feedback among the individual, local communities, and society as a whole. Each person's actions affect their community. These actions, in turn, shape and are shaped by the local community. And each situation feeds into and is pervaded by societal norms and expectations. We can approach problematic situations on all three levels, in each case drawing insight from the others. For the rest of this presentation, we focus on the local community level. Our approach is based on activism targeted towards meliorism, defined as the belief that the world can be made better by human effort. 4 shared, interwoven, and interactive components of intervention may be manifest in different ways on the level of the individual, the community, and society. For parsimony in illustrating this framework, we focus on climate change, although comparable processes can be elaborated for technology change and for 21st century political economies. A starting point is awareness of a problematic situation that threatens the harmony of place integration and undermines an individual's or a community's sense of being in place. Coming to awareness of a problem situation is often preceded by the need to combat denial. Oh, the flooding of our community? It's a one-off event. There generally follows a process of identifying and defining elements of the situation and perceiving it as problematic. Part of this may involve considering the degree to which a situation is self-generated versus externally imposed. There may follow a phase of community self-education about the characteristics and consequences of the problematic situation. Sometimes this is stimulated by activist residents' concerns. For example, why the hell is my backyard flooded for 3 of the past 5 years? Coming to an awareness generally transitions to a process of inquiry, developing a deeper understanding of the situation through reading and research, conversations among neighbors, insights from the media, the coalescence of a community group or community at large around concerned leaders, as well as outside consultation with people having expertise and experience in response to the impacts of climate change. Ideally, this process heralds the emergence of activism, motivation toward community engagement, collaborative applied research, and ongoing community decision-making and intervention on a local level. Examples of such engagement are reflected in a large and ever-growing literature on participatory action research and on community activism. Consistent with Dewey's perspective, the essence of success at this point is the need to exercise imagination in creating innovative solutions to address each problematic situation in a manner that integrates local knowledge, values, and priorities with a collaborative exploration of alternatives. This involves discussion and deliberation on possible courses of action and the potential consequences of each considered alternative. This, in turn, typically is accompanied by an aesthetic view of what probable outcome is most desirable, the type of new place and the associated person-place harmony to which a community aspires and values most in the restoration or a movement toward a more harmonious situation. Of course, coming up with solutions is by itself inadequate. Creativity, insight, and developing strategic options only works when associated with ongoing action, implementation of specific approaches and programs. Although we are focusing on the community level of social actions, actions may be strongly shaped by individuals or by resources provided on a societal level. For example, the availability of grants or contract funding to construct a levee, relocate properties away from a floodplain, or establish barrier zones in response to wildfires. As we've already noted, consistent with a pragmatist paradigm, we do not consider each of these components of progress as mutually exclusive, as stable, or occurring in linear sequence. Rather, they simultaneously evolve as elements of a constantly changing situation. The essence lies in nurturing ongoing processes of community engagement and communal acceptance of responsibility for remaking place in a manner that aligns with community priorities. So at this point, the question becomes, what is the role of older adults in shaping future technological development, addressing climate change, and coping with political economy of increasing precarity for so many? And how is this manifest in the remaking of places and restoration of person-place harmony? In any participatory model of engagement and action to address problematic place and aging situations, older people must be involved as active participants rather than merely considered as victims. Older adults present generations that were complicit in creating the situation that caused the deterioration of the places where they live, something for which they need to assume responsibility. For example, the current climate crisis can be attributed, at least in part, to the actions of recent generations of older adults and their forebears and the lifestyles they enjoyed. At the same time, older adults can be engaged as part of the solution. Most older people express concern about climatic change, not only with respect to its immediate effects on their current situation and health and their daily lives, but also with regards to its implications for the future. But currently, this concern is not adequately reflected in involvement to address the problem. Achieving such engagement is both an opportunity and a priority. Active participation, especially on a local level, is personally beneficial to older adults in terms of both their physical and mental health, as has been demonstrated often. Local mobilization in addressing challenges created by climate change is also empowering. It provides an opportunity for generativity and for contributing an immediate legacy to children and grandchildren, as well as to future generations, in remaking places as more hospitable. It is important to embrace older adults in the community processes we have described, particularly during their third age. This is a population, a natural source of human capital that can contribute time, expertise, wisdom, and inspiration to problem resolution. But there are barriers to such participation. Generational barriers include reluctance to or inability to financially invest in solutions, false self-perceptions of lack of expertise and inability to make a difference, lack of awareness of what the opportunities are, and an ageist history of relegation to more menial roles. Most of these barriers can be overcome through leadership training, adapting activities to older adults' ability levels, providing alternatives to reliance on internet technologies, and addressing ageism. But perhaps the most important need is to re-energize intergenerational relationships, stimulate latent pro-social behavior, and reinforce social norms of community and public engagement. We must remake places in ways that encourage older adults to participate, assume responsibility, and become more assertive through participatory action in contributing their imagination to solving the problems that they actually created. Our thesis has been that recent societal evolution, including 3 megatrends, represents a real threat to older people and to the places where they reside. For both individuals and local communities, it is forcing major modification in habits and processes of place integration. And it's creating aging and place disharmonies that undermine the ability of older adults to ever maintain what they tried to establish as a sense of being in place. The threat is particularly acute in places where changes are exacerbating long-term generational, ethnic, economic, social, cultural, and regional disparities, and generating new ones. The situation is continuing to deteriorate, and without radical intervention, it's likely it will only get worse, with potentially lethal outcomes. We argue that the best hope lies on the level of the local community. By conducting participatory and inclusive social inquiry grounded in a motivation to increase awareness and exercise imagination as a prelude to action, communities can remake places in ways that move us in the direction of enhancing well-being for all. Our proposed solution: stimulation of local community engagement in a progressive pragmatism that improves aging and place relationships in a direction that eventually moves the life course of entire societies toward person-place harmony with equity and social justice for all, is largely theoretical. It's no panacea. Indeed, it's obviously naive, and it's obviously idealistic. While in an ideal world it might work, we do not live in an ideal world. Far from it. So how do we proceed? We suggest the need to acknowledge that despite our frustrations, significant change will not be rapid. It is likely to take generations. Like planting a tree under which we may never find shade, we must, individual by individual, community by community, seek change that will move us toward a goal that under current circumstances we can never achieve. With respect to change, the field of gerontology has been largely inept and futile, although we've made some progress from a decade ago. Our task as an intellectual applied community of scholars and practitioners is to exercise imagination in seeking pathways that inch us towards achieving the Holy Grail, a world where aging and place will be in harmony for every older adult. As Malcolm and my own shared work on this topic proceeds, we will be focusing on explicating concrete steps to move us in this direction. In the interim, we remain committed to social hope and to meliorism, because there's no other way. Thank you. Did I overrun by much? No, it's okay.
Thanks very much, Graham, for such a wonderful opening plenary, and for something that has really given us so much thought for the coming days as well, and has hit on all the themes that we wanted to think about. Certainly, Graham has not just given us some insights into those theoretical ideas, but also into those practical suggestions, and has really helped provoke a lot of ideas that we can explore in the next coming days. So as a step in that exploration, I will ask Professor Andrew Sharlock, who's Professor Emeritus from the Department of Social Welfare in the University of Berkeley, to speak to Graham's talk. Andrew, besides having extensive experience and interests around social policy issues and public policy issues around family support, social support, and different elements such as those, also explores these in the context of age-friendly communities and livable communities. So he's expertly placed to respond to Graham's talk. So please, Andrew.
Thank you, Kieran. So, following Graham is always not so easy. The scope of his thinking, his ability to simultaneously look at the smallest level, the micro level, and also the largest level. His ability to, as he said, imagine, but also his commitment to, his idealistic perhaps, commitment to a better world for all of us to grow older in, to live in. So I only have a few minutes. I thought I would highlight just a few of the topics that Graham hit upon, and then take the liberty of adding a couple of more thoughts of my own. It's striking the way in which Powell Lawton's idea of person-environment fit and the idea of aging in place has now sort of been exploded in a way to think about place as the environment at large, not just place in terms of one's immediate physical environment, but also one's community, and indeed the whole larger social environment within which we live. And looking at that social environment, Graham highlights the ongoing processes of technological development, of climate change, and the changes in political economy, the neoliberal changes in globalism that we've experienced. I guess a few points. One is that, as Graham notes, these changes have beneficial, perhaps salutary aspects, as well as deleterious aspects. And by themselves, with perhaps climate change is the exception, they are not inherently bad. Certainly technology and technological developments are not bad. And when we talk about aging, we have safer cars. I just traded in my 10-year-old car for a new car that actually lets me know when I'm especially driving here in Ireland, when I'm edging a little too far to the left curb. The car now lets me know that, whereas before it was the bushes on the side of the road that let me know that the last time I was here 10 years ago. And at the same time, these technologies, especially as we shift to a more digital world, are bringing us together digitally and distancing us from one another in terms of our physical contact. And also, since most of these devices were not designed by or with the input of anybody over the age of 40, maybe 50, certainly not my age, they weren't designed well. I mean, I can't tell you, working on a laptop, this is just not a good position, especially for somebody with arthritis. It just doesn't work. Similarly, cell phones. My daughter says, don't try and speak into it and have it come out garbled. Just key in. And well, keying in for me and keying in for her are two very different experiences, partly because of what she's used to, but mostly because of just the digital mobility that I have versus what she has. So nobody asked us. Also, when we look at some of the monitoring devices and things, okay, climate change, fewer cold-related deaths, and maybe some other positive aspects, but certainly the more extreme climate events, which affect those who are most vulnerable, including older adults. Neoliberalism, greater economic well-being in some ways, but also increased disparities and precarity, and the impact on communities and families, adding to mobility and dislocation, which has the greatest impact on those who are most vulnerable, those who are most dependent upon contact with people in their immediate environment, including families. So the goal, situational harmony. So I want to just spend a couple of minutes thinking about this concept of situational harmony. I've already said, when we talk about the situation, the environment, it's not just your immediate physical environment. So when we think about aging in place, many of us are sort of moving from that notion to the notion of aging in community, where the community is sort of the larger social context, and where every member of that community has responsibility for the well-being of the community and its members, as well as rights to receive support and inclusion from those communities, which raises questions about what are the responsibilities of older adults, and in fact all of us, as we think about these various trends and how they unfold. In some of the work that myself and my colleagues have done, we've tried to sort of blow up this idea of situational harmony and think about, well, what does that mean? What are the characteristics of that? And just for heuristic purposes, we came up with 6 words that in English begin with the letter C. They're not always perfect, but it's what we did. In looking at environments, the first word is continuity, the idea that age by itself should not be a barrier to being able to meet one's needs and live in environments that are salutary, if you will, and to be able to continue to do the things that have been meaningful to us early in our life. But age also brings limitations, physical related. And so there's the issue of compensation, the idea that we need support of various kinds. We need changes in our physical environment and our social environment to be able to continue to live well in it as we age, as we change over time. Also embedded in that is the idea that our environments are changing over time. Older adults are more likely to live in physical environment, houses and apartments, that themselves are older and have greater needs for repairs and modifications. The third C is control, that so much of what's developed is developed in ways that either take away or don't support the control of older adults. And in decisions about safety and various other things, older adults, and all of us, look for opportunities to have an impact to control these forces that are upon us. And in some ways, it's been argued that the sort of learned helplessness that's embedded in aging in most modern societies, that we need to lean against that in terms of how we can increase the sense of empowerment, the sense of control for older adults. Fourth one is connection, that in a world which increases our sense of loneliness, that separates us from one another, and a world in which we are much less likely to live in close proximity with stable family as well as social connections. Ways to be connected, to continue to be connected, are imperative. Graham mentioned the idea of engagement, responsibility. I mentioned responsibility, the idea of contribution, that as we age, we don't lose the need, and I might argue the responsibility, to continue to have an impact on the world around us, even though the world around us may make it harder to do that. And the last one is challenge, the need for stimulation. That it's better to wear out than to rust out, as they say. One of the greatest problems as we age is decreased opportunities to exercise our bodies, our minds, be engaged. So just to finish, we have persons, we have environments, the context, large, overall speaking, as those change over time. The environment impacts us, but we also have a responsibility to impact the environment, to impact these changes, both for the well-being of people who today are old, but also for the well-being of all of us as we continue to develop and age throughout our lives. Of particular concern are those who are most vulnerable, who have less ability to control and impact the changes that are occurring, those with fewer options, those who are more precarious. Which brings us to this conference and why we are here. An opportunity to look at these forces, to look at aging in its social environment as that changes over time, and to sort of dig down into this concept of social change and what it means to change the social environments within which we live and within which we age. So I think I'll stop there, and I think we have time for some questions. Yeah, Karen?
Thank you very much, Andrew, for summarising some of the key points and adding some additional ones to elaborate a little bit further. So I'm going to ask Graham and Andrew to take a seat here for a few minutes. We have, it's late in the evening, but we still have a little bit of time before the opening reception. So I would invite any questions from the audience now for Graham, and indeed something to maybe inspire a bit of discussion between Graham and Andy. So please, any questions? Yes, please, just here. And there's a microphone just coming to you as well.
I noticed none of you addressed the notion of migration. We have so many people changing their life and aging in different places, and that changing over time and trying to recreate those communities. So I wonder if you had any thoughts about, I mean, we have a global notion of gerontology, but there seems much more detail to wade into that. It may fall within the schema that you've identified, but I'd appreciate your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Retirement, most older people don't migrate when they retire, but those who do have a historic pattern of moving in particular directions. And in the larger paper, I developed a little bit more on this. The whole notion, for example, that in the United States, a lot of the migration has been from the north towards the Sun Belt. And what happens is, as the Sun Belt, and particularly, for example, Texas, and places that have, 100 days of 100 degrees, like in Arizona, as that occurs, it appears that the migration patterns of older adults are changing. Okay, so they want to avoid the worst areas, at least in the United States, where they're likely to have a hurricane come through to destroy their home that they've built over years and years and years. And so what's happening, what we're anticipating and what we suggest is that migration patterns are going to change. As sea levels rise, for example, people, and older adults in particular, who wanted to retire to the coast are going to think twice or 3 times or maybe 5 times about whether they want to go into that risk environment. Now, the effect of this, and it's only just beginning to appear in census data and other material, is that people are choosing different places to retire. So the 2 gentlemen that I spoke about who live in my community, they left Texas and moved north because they couldn't grow their plants there. And so they moved up to Kentucky. And this is a pattern that's going to be increasing more and more and more away from those Sunbelt and coastal areas. One trend that we can document right now is that, in fact, older adults are not dumb. They're basically deciding where is the best place for me to move to avoid climate change, to have environments that are very supportive, and where my being in place is not going to be disrupted. So what we're finding in the United States is that instead of moving to the southern states, there's a trend towards people moving to the middle kind of states, like, for example, Kentucky, Arkansas, the Carolinas, and so on, where they get sort of not the super cold of winter and not the blazing summer heat there. And so what I'm suggesting is that there's going to be different patterns of migration that emerge. Because one thing we don't think about with climate change is the fact that climate change can actually affect communities in a good way, in the sense that places that were formerly too cold to be are now kind of warming up a little bit because of global warming. So what we perceive is going to happen is that we're going to get situations where some communities are able to advertise, come to us because we don't have global warming, and that'll attract people. And the others are going to say, well, these are the things we're putting in place to help you out, so please come. So please keep coming. So there is some work going on in that area, and I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does. It addresses one big issue for migration, which is climate change.
Yeah.
But there's the other various reasons why people, and you have a bunch of folks from South America on the border of Texas, and and then they send them up to New York and buses. Yeah. It seems to me that there's a whole impact of the poorer countries having to look for the United States or Canada or other more affluent countries for to be. So climate change is only one variable.
Oh yeah. For example, people. For example, there's an increase in people migrating and retiring to Mexico, for example, going south because of healthcare costs and because they're able to do that. And there are actual communities, retirement communities, emerging there. Sorry, I just let you.
So just one more comment. I see migration as being big contributors are all three issues that Graham mentioned. The technological changes in terms of long-distance communication and the ability to move, etc. And because my interest over the years has been very much on family and immediate community, that's having a tremendous impact on family connections and on the stability of communities. In China, where there's been some concern for left behind children as parents move to the coast to work. There's now beginning attention on left behind elders because, and it's not just in China, you can look at it, it's happening in Mexico, it's happening in Southeast Asia, the Philippines, a whole variety of places where older adults, grandparents and great-grandparents, the younger people of their families are no longer present. They come home once a year, twice a year during holidays because they're over there making money to live and sending money home. So it has big impact on the stability of families.
Okay, so we have another question just over here. Just over here, if you have a microphone. Oh, okay, sorry, and then we'll come back to you. We'll come back to you.
Good.
Sorry. Do you want to ask your question quickly? Yeah.
I was tagging on to my colleague's opening question. One of the problems which has pre-existed for many, many decades is that of the homeless. There are about approximately, according to authorities, 150 million people who are homeless right now. That brings in our be a devil's advocate and say, what quality of life do they have, let alone health care, socioeconomic status, job opportunities, etc. That amounts to about 2% of the working population. Now, not all of those are seniors, of course, and they're countries which are not surprisingly have a disproportionate number of homeless in the Democratic Republic of Congo, for instance. But I've just come from Dublin. I live in Canada. I used to live in England, and I migrated to Canada, and I've come to Dublin. I spent a night there, and there are people in the doorways, you know, with their belongings, what have you, as there are in Oxford, and London, and Vancouver. So, do people sometimes choose the way they want to live, or is it because of situations they got themselves into, whether it's marital or alcohol or addiction or whatever? What are we going to do about homeless? How can we ameliorate their lot, if you like, if it is possible to resolve it at all?
Thank you.
I personally think that it's a question of community will. The will of the community to do something about this. And part of the problem is the situation is even worse than you're suggesting. For example, and I'm not joking about this, this gentleman was not placed here. It is now, in the past month, it's just been made illegal to be homeless in Kentucky. You can be picked up and fined. Of course, you don't have any money to pay the fine or anything. But basically, the whole process of sort of closing in and restricting older people is being accentuated rather than ameliorated. And basically what happens is, and this is a good example of the whole argument that we've been making, is that basically the welfare state is no longer going to be able to do things about this. So there's no big government programs coming down the line. So what can happen? Only intervention can occur on the individual level, which I didn't talk about today, which is, you know, to take a homeless person into your home. Okay, not very realistic. Or at the community level. And what's occurring, for example, in my community, Lexington, Kentucky, which is basically 300,000 people, is that there's a movement afoot of people saying, okay, so what can we actually do about this? So that very process of identifying the situation and defining it and trying to be creative about solutions is actually in process. So there's groups of people actually working on this situation. A comparable situation, for example, is people who don't have housing. Our state has a 200,000 shortage in homes for people. So there's a group in Lexington as well. And again, this is an example of this community process. A group of people who for the past 10 years have been meeting, unpaid completely, and developing programs where they work with the city to address the housing shortage in terms of new kinds of housing and so on. So my sense is that it's not going to come from the government, and it's not going to come from neoliberal policies of what's happening. It's going to have to come from communities, and it's going to have to come on that level that I've been trying to, or that we've been trying to push, of local communities saying, this is not acceptable, we have to do something. And instead of looking at the government, and the government saying, no way, sorry, we're in an austerity mode, they basically sit down and say, well, we've got to do something for self, because I really don't feel comfortable when I go downtown to the movies, and as I move into the movie, there's a guy in the doorway there. And very often, as you said, an older person. Okay. So I think you're giving a great example of the situation we're trying to describe.
Thanks, Graham. And do you want to give a quick response?
I agree 100%. I think this is kind of overly idealistic, but it's a matter of rebuilding the sense of community. It's a matter of saying that person is my neighbor, I'm connected to them in some way. And it's only when we think, oh, that person, I have nothing to do with them, they're from another planet, that we walk over somebody and say, oh, you know, what's he doing in my way? So,
okay, and Ness.
Hi, thanks Graham and Andrew for a really thoughtful piece of work. I was surprised we didn't hear anything about trust, disillusionment and power. It sounds very much like participatory action, and community action is for those that feel empowered in some ways, that are middle class, dare I say, with a good education. And I'm thinking of some of the examples you gave of people contributing to climate change and putting the blame on them. I'd like to see perhaps that argument put to miners, who you could say perhaps were contributing to climate change because they were down there digging the coal. But I don't think that would wash with people who then saw their whole livelihoods collapse when they had no power over mines closing. Yeah. In those communities where community action was at the forefront of trying to make change, yet made no impact. How do you go about saying for communities like that, where they've got a constant reminder on the hillsides of the closed mines, that yes, as a community you can drive forward this, and it's your responsibility now in later life to do that. I think that is a challenge that we don't address, how we build trust in particular communities like that, and drive forward that agenda.
Okay. Can I ask you, if you want to respond, to keep a concise response to get a couple more questions in?
My concise response is to recognize in those communities that are most vulnerable because of these changes, that they will take more investment. They will need more outside investment, resources, both financial as well as social, to help them transition, to help them deal with, adapt with, and have a voice in determining how these changes unfold.
Just reinforce Andrew's point there. I live in a state where the situation you're describing is precisely what's involved, and it's made more complex by the fact that we have a serious drug problem, because what happens is when people are out of work and have no opportunities, they resort to other means. And so what we do is we address the drug problem without addressing the issues of what caused it, in a sense, in the first place.
Okay, and we have one question, Sean?
I would plan that, Andrew, that you got to the last of your C's, which was the challenges, because up until that point for me, it was just holding everything back. You know, a lot of the language and terminology, you know, continuity, maintenance, and all of that's fair enough. But it's as if we're just going to push against technology and politics and climate change and hope to kind of live on or exist in those circumstances. But I think we're missing older people wanting to go forward and have new challenges in that. Right? And I know that that's not possible for everyone, but I would like to hear a bit more of your thoughts on that.
Okay. Obviously, I agree with you 100%. And that's actually part of my critique of the idea of this idea of situational harmony, because it sort of has this blissful, you know, you're plugged in and all your needs are taken care of. And as we live our lives, and especially as we get older, the opportunities to be challenged and have an impact. I think that where I begin really is to say age alone does not exempt you from having responsibility for yourself and for others around you. I mean, that's sort of where I begin. And then I'll talk tomorrow about a treatment model, a social community model, the village model, which has to do with older adults being responsible for helping one another. And so that's just one example, but those kinds of things. So I mean, we could have a side conversation, but yeah.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
Just a brief response on that, to clarify. Situational harmony is not an end goal in the sense that it's a dynamic process that's constantly changing. As the situation changes, what is harmony changes as well. So we're not trying to set things up to have an end goal that's static, because as soon as we do, that goal, that end point changes.
Okay, and just up here.
I appreciate your very thoughtful and broad presentation. Great respect for all you covered. And it appears to me that you're putting your state into community, that level for change. I would want to know more about how you're defining community. It seemed to me at times it was a geographic notion. And first I could say individuals don't even agree on what their community is. They have different boundaries, different neighborhoods.
Right.
Also there's social community, LGBTQ, Black, etc. So as you develop this, I think about it, and I appreciated this other, I don't remember names or anything, but this other woman's comment about power and who has power in the community. Studies show who shows up for community meetings are typically affluent.
Yep.
So I would like you to talk a little bit about what you mean by community and also how structural racism and sexism, in addition to ageism, is really impacting power and opportunity. And I want to say communities are not always benign.
Yeah.
So just if you could talk a little bit about how you are conceptualizing community and grappling with so many different ways of conceptualizing it.
Thanks very much.
This is an issue we're grappling with because, for example, with regards to technology, we now think of communities as online communities. So, for example, a community to address climate change could be a group of people who live in different parts of the world even to do that. But essentially, the outcome of what they do is manifest in places, okay? And so the whole idea is to define community in a very liberal way, in a sense. On one hand, it can be our own community, the town of 400 people or whatever it is where we live. But it can also be other kinds of sub-communities. It can be at different levels on the state level. And so it can be a community of coal miners that involves coal miners from different parts of the country that shares and that develops ways of strategizing to address the discontinuities and the disharmony that exists. So you're right, you're simply pointing out, at least for me, a problem that we're grappling with, and actually we have been grappling with for decades.
Just to underscore the point, power dynamics typically are left out of most of these discussions. The Global Age-Friendly Cities and Communities movement has grappled with these issues, but not well, and has by and large ignored them. I'll talk about it a little bit tomorrow, and mine will talk about villages, but as Judith and I have talked about before, the village movement, and most of these efforts are largely relatively highly educated, at least middle class, economically secure individuals coming together, being, fortunately or unfortunately, concerned about the well-being of other reasonably secure individuals. And there is the question of how do we make sure that everybody's voice is heard, and everybody's responded to, and that everybody is actively included in the process. In the face of structural forces that disempower certain groups and make certain people in certain groups much more precarious. So, bigger conversation, but I think it's a critical one to include.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think this is an excellent place to leave the conversation. Like all wonderful talks and sessions, Graham's talk has given us some insights and also lots of interesting questions to grapple with over the next while. I think there are pieces here that we could take forward into the future plenaries and future sessions around ideas of solidarity, ideas of power and how those powers might be reproduced even when we think that it might not be, and how we try and look at that diversity of dynamics and how we include diverse voices within these spaces as well. So thank you very much to Andy for his response, and thank you especially to Graham for a very wonderful opening plenary. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you.
So there is an opening reception
Yeah, but
just
it's very-
outside,
it's
and there will
kind
be
of
some
naive
music
and
a little bit
optimistic,
later
and
on. So
we need to
please
get into
make your way
questions of
outside,
power
and hopefully
and
you
how
can
we
enjoy the
define
evening.
community.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
And that's why I said at the end, this is going to take generations.